Okay, good morning. For those of you that weren't here yesterday or are joining us online, my name is Maggie Stensis, and I'm the Strategic Communications Officer for the South Dakota Department of Agriculture. I'll be your MC today. So, welcome back. Before we jump into this morning's great session, I want to thank just a few more of our sponsors. Please help me in thanking BNSF and First Dakota National Bank. Now let's get to our first session of the day underway. Unfortunately, misinformation exists in several different areas surrounding agriculture, and it can be difficult for producers to address these issues directly with consumers. Therefore, we are happy to welcome Roxi Beck, the Director of Consumer Engagement at the Center for Food Integrity, who will give us 3 important steps to help make these conversations more productive. Roxi received her bachelor's degrees in psychology and public relations from Coe College and currently serves on the board for Iowa State University's Agricultural Entrepreneurship Initiative. As Consumer Engagement Director for the Center for Food Integrity and Vice President at Look East Consulting, Beck brings 15 years of experience working with clients across the food system, directing strategy and activities for consumer-facing food and agricultural initiatives. We are happy to welcome Roxi Beck to the podium.
Thank you. Good morning. I always ask people, don't read all that stuff. All that's important is I'm a farm kid from Minnesota. I like to say I'm a retired farmer. I grew up on a dairy, and now I am at the intersection between people who produce food and eaters who don't understand it. So that kind of covers a lot of ground. We have such an interesting dynamic today with consumers and with what's going on in production. Never before has there been so much interest and so much opportunity to jump into what we call today food, and obviously agriculture has a phenomenal part of that. But also, access to information has created a lot of misinformation in the mind of the industry and certainly being consumed by all of those who eat. So we have this great opportunity to kind of uncouple what's going on and understand there's a different approach to actually connect with people who have a phenomenal amount of questions about food, who desire to know who's producing food, who's making decisions within companies, who's doing the innovating that's ending up on their plates and in their mouths. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Center for Food Integrity first. Get the clicker to work. Our whole mission is to earn consumer trust and confidence in today's food system. It sounds like a big mountain, and it is, because there's a lot of questioning of what's going on. We're sitting in a society who has been trained to question everything, and we trust in mistrust. Skepticism persists, and we think there's opportunity there. Now, we're very science-minded. We always look to scientific consensus, but we're a nonprofit organization. So we don't do any policy work, we don't do any lobbying. We are here to understand what consumers think, and we do that on an annual basis through our research. And then we bring that information back to the food system to help balance the conversation about food. It's our belief that actually what consumers say they expect from the food system and what they want is more in alignment with what is actually going on than maybe they believe. And we think there are some things that are going on in the mind of the consumer and those who are advocating for a difference in this food system that should be considered by the food system. So we think there's a middle point. We just need to all move forward towards it. That research that we produce allows us to create programs and help the food system talk about what it does in a different way. And we work all the way across the food system. So whether that's with university partners, farm groups, both state and national, whether it's sharing with people in government, what do the consumers think about all these technologies and innovations, all the way to toxicologists and veterinarians and farmers that are sitting in fields and in facilities. We work with food companies and restaurants and retailers to help them understand what it is that we've learned and give them a new approach to thinking about how you connect truly with consumers. So before we get started, I have a little bit of an interactive story that we're going to go through. And so I'm going to need 3 volunteers, and we've got a couple mics around the room. So I want to start out with a story because I think this is probably familiar to many of us. Just by show of hands, how many of you have ever been on the receiving end of a comment where you're going, this person has no idea what they're talking about? Related to food, related to agriculture. Okay. So if you didn't raise your hand, you're probably not in the industry, right? I want to tell you a little bit of a story, but first I need to introduce you to the characters in our story. And this is where I'm going to need your help. So the first character in the story is Savannah, and all we know about Savannah is she owns this hat. So I have a couple questions, and ma'am in the white, can I ask you, how old do you think Savannah is? 15, okay. And what is her favorite food? Ice cream. And where does she wear this hat? To a carnival. Okay, perfect, thank you. Next, Sarah is our character. And I need, you looked right at me and then looked down, which means you didn't want to volunteer, which is why I'm calling on you. Tell me a little bit about Sarah. How old is Sarah? 24. And what is her profession? Professional marketer. And let's see, does she have children? Okay. Where does she wear those shoes? Friday night, getting out on the town. Okay, perfect, thank you. And the last character is Jan. And this bag belongs to Jan. So, sir, with a great smile. What is Jan's profession?
What is her profession?
Yes.
She's a market analyst.
She's a market analyst, okay. So maybe she and Sarah work together. What city does she live in? Chicago. And what does she think about Sarah and her shoes? Those ones.
She likes to tell Sarah that they're nice shoes.
So if you didn't hear, she likes to tell Sarah, those are really nice shoes, right? Maybe not so practical. Okay, very good. So there really is a true story behind these three characters, and I want to tell you that now. I've forced you to make up a story, which is oftentimes what happens when we think about the statements that people bring to us, okay? But there is an underlying truth here. So what happened that brings all of these people together? Jan was told by Sarah with the fancy shoes, you know what, I only buy organic milk. And I know it's not enough. I've got 4 kids. I can only buy 1 gallon a week. My pediatrician tells me that's not enough. But I don't want to buy, anything that's going to give my kids those hormones, those antibiotics, or even the GMOs that those cows ate. Pretty loaded. And Jan did what any good focus group facilitator would do. That's her profession. And she said, help me understand how you came to that conclusion, that opting into organic is a protection for you. And she said, well, let me tell you the story about my daughter, Savannah. Savannah, again, one of my 4 children, has some challenges with her health. And my husband and I are out on a rare date night, and I'm wearing these super fancy shoes, which were completely impractical. But we're out on this rare date night, and we get a frantic call from our babysitter. And she said, I didn't know, we're headed to the hospital, meet us there. And what she didn't know is that Savannah was severely allergic to peanuts. She brought Reese's peanut butter cups, and now they're in a life or death situation. So Sarah, as the mother, has now gotten to this position where she says, what do I value in life? What do I care about? As a mom, my job is to protect every interest of every one of my children. So while she didn't understand organic milk, what she did firmly understand is that my job as a mother is to protect my children. And if I can opt out of something that seems to present risk, I'm going to do it at all costs. Even if that means we're going to trade out some of our other nutrients that our pediatrician tells us are important, I'm going to do this to protect. So when these conversations come to us, when these statements or these questions are posed, we are sitting looking at an iceberg. Sarah, with her comment about, I only buy this because of this, is just the tip of the iceberg. And if you know anything about icebergs, you see about 10% of the whole truth, right? Of what's all there. 90% of what is with that iceberg is sitting underneath the water. So we can say that what comes out of a person's mouth is the 10% that we see. And until we're able to dig down and get underneath that iceberg and get to the other side, we are never going to be able to answer questions or come to them with information that's meaningful for the truth that they're sitting with. And we even saw this with the shoe question. Well, here's what she says, but here's what she's thinking. It's part of our daily lives. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what we've discovered through consumer research. We do research every year and sometimes multiple times a year. We do this in different ways. One, we go one-to-one. We do humans on the street, which I'll show you in a second. We do focus groups where we get small groups of people and can ask them a lot of questions about why. We can probe them just like Jan did. And then we also do larger, what they call quantitative surveys, where we're looking at thousands of people and their opinions at one time. So we can understand what they're thinking, but maybe not why they're thinking, but we know directionally what do we need to think about as an industry. So I want to introduce you to some of my friends from the streets, if you will. We asked them this question, and just to give you an insight into what they think about today's farmers.
I do. I grew up in small town Iowa and, around farmers and, they're good people. And so you think about them when you think about where your food comes from.
No. Farming has become agribusiness in the United States. And agribusiness is maximization of profit. And so chemicals are used. They don't have the conservation for the land beyond the immediate needs.
Maybe in general, no. I think they rely too much on GMOs. I think it's largely corporations, and if it's corporate-driven, it's profit-driven, which is profit-driven at all costs.
The single family-owned farm, yes. Corporate farming, I don't know. True farmers take care of their land and want it to last for generations. Corporate farming is not like that.
Maybe the family farms or the smaller local farms more than the corporation or like the big factory farms, but in general I would say yeah.
As from what I get in the supermarket, no. I think there's a lot of things we don't know about how our food is grown and how it's harvested, and that makes me really worried. And what I do know of it, I don't like, so I can only imagine what I don't know. So I just don't think it's a very trustable source.
Yeah, I do. They're heavily regulated to ensure that what they put out on our tables is good for everyone, that they're not just putting stuff out there.
Yes. Probably more so with the produce than with the meat. The meat part kind of scares me as to how that's being done. Just with like the things they put into the cows before they're slaughtered, it just sounds like maybe that might be a little questionable.
I would say no, because most farmers, or I guess most farms, are commercially owned by other larger companies, conglomerates, or whatever have you. I want to trust them, but I can't because I don't have enough information on that farm.
I want to, but I do think that they need to take care of their families and they need to be making money. So I think they're doing what they have to do that.
Well, I think you kind of have to a certain degree. What else are you going to do?
So as I was watching that, I heard some giggles, I saw some scowls, I saw some nodding and some shaking. So when we think about that, raise your hand if there's anything you heard that gives you some pause or some concern. Okay? Raise your hand if you heard there's some positives in there, or some truths that you're thinking, I might also agree. Okay, good. So we understand there are half-truths or quarter-truths that hit the consuming public. Forward with products, with processes that they're implementing, and even with the labels they're putting on food. But let's take a little bit of a dive. First of all, I will note that those were taken at a farmer's market, but also right outside a grocery store. Guess where those were filmed? What city were we in? Say it again. Des Moines? Close, Lincoln, Nebraska. So this was not, some major, bustling city. This was not on the coast. This is our people, right? When we asked them that question, do you trust? There were very definitive yes and no's, right? Or I want to, but here's what's holding me back. So on the no side of the equation, we're seeing a lot of issues, a lot of topics for which we have a ton of facts, science, data to support what we know, as well as what we want consumers to know, and maybe even what we want to correct based on the misinformation that's prevalent. When we look at the indications of why did they say yes, it's cases. Well, if I know them, farm, then I feel good about it. Make a quick swap. If they're regulated, or because they're regulated, then I can trust them, right? Somebody's looking over them. Or I only support specific sectors. You heard the one woman say, you know, if it's from a grocery store, I don't think I can trust it, and that's why I'm opting into, you know, just local, just the farmer's market, just fruits and veggies. And certainly they trust it because they know it's connected to families and taking care of families, doing what's right because they connect to that. So these on the right side maybe are less fact-based. There's less maybe ammunition in terms of all of the science and the data that supports what we're doing, but there's still a lot on that right side, the yes, here's why I trust them, that would be true for most every farmer that we know, right? I want to tell you a little bit more about those indications across the broader population of people we talk to, just to kind of set the stage for what do we do about this. So as it relates to our survey, we do a cross-section, 2,000 consumers. We look at a representative sampling, so across geography, education, income, everything, to make sure that it's balanced and to be consistent with the population. And we ask them, what's your overall population, overall opinion and impression of U.S. agriculture? And really, we're doing better than it might feel, especially right after we see those man on the street or human on the street interviews. So we have a good percentage of our respondents, again, that represent the population, saying, I feel really, very positive or somewhat positive about what's going on in agriculture, okay? When we ask them, tell us about your knowledge of farming. What would you say it is that you know? And some people, 19%, say, I know a lot. So 1 in 5 people is saying, I know a lot about this industry. And the next 56% are saying, I know a little. Now, we don't know what they know, but we do know that they believe that they have a great connection and know a lot about this industry. When we ask them, what are the topics you search for most online, there were 4 that came to the top. Ingredients in food, they're Googling those ingredients they can't pronounce or have more syllables than they're supposed to. They're looking at the impact of food on my health. We know that food safety, food health, and affordability are all tied together, but the impact of food on my health is something really important, 57%. Food safety overall, food safety and food health are becoming crossed over. People aren't differentiating the two. And then the treatment of animals raised for food at 35%. So those were the top 4 things that consumers are looking for when they go online. As it relates to other topics we ask them about, so we give them a set of statements, attitudinal statements, and we ask them to rate their level of agreement for that statement. So for example, food grown organically is more healthful than conventionally grown food. We ask them to rate their level of agreement, scale of 0 to 10. So on the right side, the 37% are people that have responded with an 8, 9, or 10, and we consider that a high level of agreement, a strong agreement. So 37% of the public thinks that organic is more healthful. Is that higher or lower than you expected? It's higher, okay? And some people will say they think 80% of people are going to have a strong level of agreement with that, right? What's opportunistic in all of this is that 48% in the green, right? Green means go, so that's where we have an opportunity. These are people that haven't made up their mind. They rated right in the middle of that scale at 4 to 7 and said, I'm not really sure. I don't have enough information, so I can't choose. And then you had another 15% that said, I strongly disagree with that statement, okay? So you've got 50% of the population probably listening to some of those in the 30% and some of those in the 15%, but they haven't yet made up their mind. So every time you see that middle green bar, think about that as agriculture's opportunity to explain what we do. U.S. farmers take good care of the environment. 30% of consumers strongly agree, and 60% don't know enough. I'm more concerned about global warming or climate change than I was a year ago. Almost 40% of people strongly agree, but you've got another 40% that don't know. How about food as we shift from what's going on in agriculture to the food that I'm putting on my family's plates? I feel confident about the food choices I make for my family. 46% of people say, I feel pretty good about that. And then you look at the obesity stats and we wonder what's going on, right? I'm more concerned about healthy eating than I was a year ago. 43% of people strongly agree. I'm personally concerned about, this is something we added in this most recent survey because we see this, I'm personally concerned about. I'm conflicted when I make decisions at the marketplace. And so we wanted to know what are some of those things that they feel a deep level of concern about. So, and we looked at what are food companies and restaurants marketing on that may be either playing into this concern or responding to the concern. So 52% of consumers said, I'm strongly concerned about chemicals in food. How many of you are coffee drinkers? How many of you consume dihydrous monoxide every day? H2O? Okay? Chemicals are in everything we consume, everything we touch, everything we see, but we forget when somebody uses a label like chemicals that there's a disconnect. We've also seen this idea of artificial ingredients in food and companies and restaurants saying we've eliminated artificial colorings, flavors, ingredients. 47% of consumers are saying, I'm concerned about that. And for good reason is why these marketers are leveraging this point as a way to market. How about the number of ingredients in food? We've seen a lot of types of diets that just say, just eliminate anything with more than 5 ingredients. So we've got 42% of people saying, I'm concerned about just the number of ingredients in food. And specifically, are you concerned about GMOs in food? And 44% said, I'm concerned about that. I want to dig into that one a little bit because this is one of those iceberg moments where we've seen labeling debates, we've seen a lot, and I think we can learn a ton from what's gone on in the GMO conversation over the last several years. So everybody remember 2012 when there was a ballot initiative in California that was going to be precedent-setting and put GMO labels on food? That ballot initiative barely failed. It was a 52-48 split. And as a result of that ballot initiative, there were a lot of movements, if you will. One of the movements was a group called Just Label It. And it's a nonprofit organization that says, just label it. We as consumers have a right to know. This is something that you should be fully transparent about. If this technology is something you, industry, are so excited about and proud of, then why aren't you willing to label it? So that's one camp. And they would ask people, do you want GMOs labeled? And they would get in the high 90% numbers for people saying, yes, I want that information. The other camp was, this is a slippery slope. If we start labeling it on, our foods that we eat every day, are we also going to apply it to wine and cheeses that have GMO fermenting agents? Is it going to be for everybody or just some of us? And really, what is that information telling people? It's a process, not a thing, right? So you had that camp come up with research that said, what do you want labeled in food? Not do you want GMOs, but what specifically? And it was an open-ended response. And they got what you would expect: protein, calories, sugar, et cetera. But those are two very different questions, right? And we've learned as we think about transparency and trust building, when you give consumers the opportunity to have access to more information, so when we asked this question, we knew it was leading, but there's a follow-up to it that we think is incredibly imperative. So do you want foods labeled? When we looked across the cross-section of the US, 72% of people said, yes, I do want that information. But the why question is where the real value starts to come in. And this is where we had a lot of ahas. So when people said yes, then we said, so why? Why is it that you want that information? And they could check as many of these boxes as they wanted. But as you can see, safety concerns aren't the top reason. People aren't saying, I'm opting out of this every time because I think it's not safe or I think it's scary. There is a percentage of the population that does say that. About 22% says, I don't know if they're safe. But you've got far more curiosity and a need for transparency that's coming into this equation, with 55% of all people saying, I think it's my right to know. I support transparency and labeling. It was another 43%. I'm just curious is another 20%. And you know what? I really don't know if they're safe. So just tell me and then I'll figure it out. I'm smart enough, right? That's 15%. This next group, the people said, absolutely not, do not label. We gave a couple options. I think it's going to cause confusion, or I think that they're the same as non-GMO foods. You can see the split outs there. And then there's just a percentage that say, I don't know. I'm not familiar with what this is. There's just not enough information. Or, you know what, I just don't care. Just give me my food and get out of my way, right? So there's a huge opportunity here. And I think the opportunity is to understand people want access to information. People want to hear from this industry, and they need to hear from the industry in a way that's actually going to connect and show we're willing to be transparent. We're willing to be in a conversation in a different way than we have been before. So what do we do with all of that? As I mentioned, we go through our consumer research every year, but we always talk about our starting research. Back when the Center for Food Integrity was formed in 2009, so we're a young organization, especially as it relates to food and agriculture type organizations. But we had a set of research. We said, hey, here's our big mission, earn consumer trust in this whole food system, right? How are we going to do that? We better start to understand what the drivers are. And as we look to the research, we get really excited about some silver linings. Because when we ask people who wants to know more about food or farming, 65% of consumers said, I would like that information. Okay? When we say, who do you trust, and we give them kind of categories of people, who do you want to hear from? Look at where farmers are. 53% of consumers said, I'm going to trust a farmer for food-related information. I'm also going to, we gave them a list of 18 different sources, and these were the ones that were above 50%. So farmers are right in that crowd, along with nutrition advocacy groups, friends, family members, dietitians, university scientists, and family doctor. Aside from the title of farmer, do you see yourself anywhere on that list? Raise your hand if you do. Everybody up. You all have friends and family, I hope, right? We forget that we're involved in circles of people who already trust us, who are looking for our opinions. And if you're in this room, you're connected to agriculture already, right? When I talk to people about, farmers are 1% of the population, 2% of the population, maybe if you looked at sector-specific farming, you are these exotic animals. And when people have the opportunity to meet you, they want to know more about what it is that you do and how you make decisions. This is such a phenomenal opportunity. And sometimes we feel we have to be on the defense, but most of the time, people are just curious, okay? People go all sorts of places, but the first place, when we said, where's the first place you go? 30% of people go somewhere online, either to Google, some sort of search engine, Google, Bing, or they go to a website they already trust, a news source, a company, a blog. And then the rest of the people are reliant on, most of the time, a family member who's not online. Now that could be through a digital device, it could be on the phone, or it could be face-to-face, or local TV. And I will say that local TV, that 15% that go there first for information, that's dwindling. We see that in the boomer generation and above, that's a first source, but we do see that declining, and the digital sources going up. And these are just the top 4 first places people go. We have a dynamic where communications have changed drastically and forever. Right? We're sitting in a situation where it used to be that as an industry or as companies within it or even government entities, we could say, here's our message, we delivered it to the media, and our job was done. Right? It got out, it got distributed, and everybody knew what they needed to know. And now with the onset of digital communication, people have access to an array of crowdsourced information, whether they're doing that online, doing that in person, doing that in any of the social circles they have, as well as through media. People are influencing and trying to break down all of that complex information and apply it to their lives. And this is why consumers feel conflicted. This is why guilt and concern and skepticism come into the equation. We had a focus group where we asked, this was a group of moms who said, I'm really concerned about what I see specifically about the technology in food and farming. And so we asked the question, how do you make decisions about food? With all of this information that's coming at you, with a lot of it being highly complex, scientifically complex, and maybe even controversial, how do you make decisions? And Lisa told us, well, I think mom guilt's a huge factor. If somebody tells you something's dangerous and you hear it more than once, then you owe it to yourself to quit consuming it or to research it. I can't keep giving my kids fructose if there's a potential problem. We have to do our best jobs. Right? So you can hear the struggle, you can hear the value system in her saying, I'm trying to make great decisions, I'm trying to be a responsible adult, I'm trying to do what's right for my family, and yet I don't have time to research things to a point where I feel good about them. So I opt out of something I don't understand, or I fear, or I think presents more risk than it does presents benefit. Okay? We've all been there. And it also leads us to comments like this. This group of people was recruited, again, specifically technology and food, but very specifically genetically modified organisms. And when we ask the question, so what information sources have you used to come to this conclusion? When you say you believe GMOs are dangerous, how did you get to that point? And Heidi told us, well, I'm part of a mom's group. And when there's a big consensus, I think there's something here. You don't need doctors or scientists confirming it when you have hundreds of moms. Okay, so this is usually where I hear a little bit of laughter. How many of you use Yelp? Okay, restaurants, hotels, you're going to a new city. We rely on perfect strangers, hundreds, maybe even thousands of them, to make decisions on a daily basis. Anybody a new parent? How many of you have children? And remember when those little precious beings came into your life and you're trying to make great decisions and your doctor gave you one set of advice and then you were like, that's interesting. You hung up the phone and you called your mom. You said, Mom, what would you do? Or you went to your best friend, right? We do this all the time too. We rely on those trusted sources that we've said, this person has my heart in mind. They know what's best for me because they care about me as an individual, and this doctor just doesn't know what's going on here. And you can't rely on scientists that aren't, applying this on their daily lives. So it feels like it's a silly thing. It feels like it's something that's laughable until we go, man, we can see that hits us too in our lives. So this idea of trust is what brings us back to that research that I talked about that we started with, a decade ago, to understand if we're going to have this big goal of earning trust, we better figure out what are the drivers of trust. So when we first came into it, we said, if we have trust, what's the outcome? If we have trust, we can actually earn and maintain a social license, the privilege of operating with minimal formalized restrictions and based on doing what's right in the name of the law, as well as that of what the public expects from us. If we can do that, then we can ultimately have freedom to operate. Use the products, use the technologies within the rule of the law, following all the regulations that exist, right? But bring that product to a marketplace that's asking for it, whether that's local, regional, or global, right? And we can choose to do different types of production. We can choose the seeds that are best for us, right? So there's a great amount of flexibility in a system where you have freedom to operate. That doesn't mean you get to make up your rules, but it means you're operating in alignment with what the consumers want. So that's the big goal, right? If you have trust, you have the opportunity to keep the social license, which gives you freedom to operate. Now, the drivers of trust were the big question then. And so we worked with a researcher out of Iowa State University who's a social scientist, and he did an analysis, a meta-analysis, looking at 21 different studies, pieces of research that focused on trust building specifically in this industry. And across all those studies, he found 3 drivers of trust. The first thing he found is what he called influential others. You can think of these as the people we choose to be in our life, right? Our friends, our family members, our social sphere of influence, and the credentialed people that we have in our lives, whether that is our veterinarian, our doctor, our mechanic, people that have a specific set of credentials to do a specific thing, okay? So influentials, the people that the information is coming from is the first piece. The second 2 drivers of trust are the type of information that is shared from that person. So the first piece was competence type information. You can think of this as what's going on in the brain. This is our facts, our science, our technical skills and understanding of a topic to be able to apply to a specific question, okay? We in agriculture love this one. Right? We have every data set, every crosstab analysis, all of the research and the science to be able to make great decisions for our business, right? The second piece of information that consumers said is imperative to earn trust is what Dr. Sapp called confidence. And this is a perception of shared values. So are you a person like me? Are we jackrabbits? Did we grow up in this state? Right? Do we drink milk? Do we parent in the same ways? All of these little things that are just seemingly little things are actually important drivers of trust. So then the next question that was begged was, okay, if we have the right people doing the talking, then what ratio of information do they need to share? That which focuses on competence or that which focuses on confidence? And we were really surprised because in an equation where you say we need to be thinking about what's up here, the competence piece, or what's in here, the gut feel or the heart, right? And we're doing what's best because I'm like you or I care about you, the heart wins out. And in fact, it wins out 3 to 5 times more than just showing up with our facts and our science. It's not surprising, but it is a little bit challenging to the way that we've been doing things for decades. Okay, so facts alone are 3 to 5 times less important than just establishing a values-based connection. That's going to be the driver for trust. And it's not a new idea. Roosevelt said it decades ago. He said, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. This is basic relationship building. This is basically showing up as human beings who care about the people that we're talking to. So this is where we're going to transition. So what do we do about this? We've got this research model that tells us we might have been doing things wrong for quite some time. Yes, in our businesses, we use facts on an every single day basis, but you also use your heart. You also know what your value systems are that help you understand, I want to be in this industry. I want to follow through. I want my children and their children to be able to come in this industry, live on the land, and enjoy everything that we know is true about agriculture. So we have to stop doing 3 things, and we have to start doing 3 things. And this is the model that we've taken that model that's peer-reviewed and published and actually put it into some actionables. So the first 3 things we have to stop doing. Number 1, persuading, okay? How many of you are Vikings fans? How many of you are Packer fans? We had a quick jump. So, sir, I need to tell you all of the benefits. I need to persuade you to come to my side, and you're going to become a Vikings fan in 24 minutes. Are you good with that? You're with me? You're going to become a Vikings fan. No, this is not how this is supposed to. When I said who's a Packer fan, you were like that. Went to land. Okay. The point is this. When somebody has said, I am this, I stand for this, I believe this, it's not, 1, your job to persuade them out of that, but 2, the likelihood of your success is almost nil, unless you're dealing with Mr. Wonderful here, right? So we have to set that aside. Secondly, correcting misinformation. How many times have you been told, you've made a statement that you think is very factual, and somebody comes up and says, let me tell you, let us count the ways you are wrong about that topic. It just doesn't feel good. And it makes you feel incredibly combative and defensive because you know these things to be true. So we have to set that aside as a first or an only goal, okay? It can't be our first reason for being in a conversation. And this third one is the one that gets me into trouble most. But I will say it cannot be our first nor our only goal of being in conversations, and that is education. Now, every time I get up in front of a group, any type, I always hear, if we could just educate consumers, we wouldn't have any of these problems. And the truth is, that is 100% right. But how likely is it that we're going to ever be able to educate people to the level of education that you have when they have full-time jobs and families and lives? Almost none. The problem with trying to educate people up to the level that you are at, based on what you know, how you've dedicated your life to this industry, is that you know way too much. Right? It's an incredible thing for the industry. It's an incredible thing for the roles that you serve in the industry. But if our only goal in connecting with consumers is to say, let me tell you how uneducated you are, and let me bring you into reality, it also feels incredibly threatening to them. So we have to set that aside too as a first or an only goal. What I will say is the correcting of misinformation and the education can be outcomes of a process, right? When we truly commit to a conversation, these can be outcomes. But if it's the only reason we're in the conversation, we're gonna lose, okay? So this brings us to what are the 3 things we need to start doing? And they're very simple on paper and a little less easy in practice. So we're gonna talk about them. Listen, ask, and share. So as it relates to listening, I wanna give you some example. When I say listen, there's a caveat. It's not just let me hear what you're saying so that I can hurry up and get to my points, right? It's listening without judgment. Incredibly hard. And in fact, we're poised to and trained to judge everything we see every day. It was part of fight or flight, right? Survival mechanism was make stereotypes such that you can move and not die. So it looks a little bit different in today's world, but we have to stop judging people. Remember Sarah's comment that she told Jan. It would be very easy to judge her and say, you have no idea what organic milk is. Don't you understand every drop of milk has hormones in it because it came from a lactating being? And there's no antibiotics because it's tested for that stuff, and GMOs don't pass through. Now, we could try to educate her up and correct all the bits of this information and persuade her to feed her children, give her children more nutrients, but we would have totally missed the point. So when you think about listening without judgment, understand that you have to be as committed to learning as you want somebody else to learn about you, okay? Stephen Covey said, most people don't listen with the intent to understand, they listen with the intent to reply. We have to stop doing that. We have to first seek to understand what people are talking about and their realities before we can seek for them to understand what we know, okay? As it relates to this idea of asking, it's actually a 2-step process. So I need 2 volunteers. Can I get you 2 gentlemen to come here for a moment? I just need you to stand right here. Yes, you 2. They're going. It's simple and painless. Come stand right here. So I want you to stand right in about this same spot, and look out. And I want you, what is your name?
Eric.
Eric, I want you to tell me just 3 things that you see.
An exit sign.
Exit sign?
Camera. And then a whole lot of people.
A whole lot of people, okay. And sir, what is your name?
Jeremy.
Jeremy. Tell me 3 things that you see.
A lot of old and new friends, a lot of leaders in agriculture, and yes, a camera.
Okay. So there were some similarities there, right? Both Eric and Jeremy saw a camera. They saw people, maybe some familiar faces, maybe some unfamiliar faces, and there was one piece that maybe both of them didn't quite see the same, which was the exit sign. Now I want, Eric, you to take 1 step forward. Jeremy, I want you to take 1 step to the right, and I want you to turn around. Now I'm going to ask you the same question. You're both still standing about the same point. I'm going to ask you the exact same question. Eric, what do you see?
I see a lot more friendly faces now.
Do you see the same things as you saw before? Do you still see an exit sign, camera, and people? No. No?
Well, I mean, I still see it. I just have different perspective.
Okay. So he has a little bit different perspective. He's broadened a little bit based on what he was told by Jeremy, perhaps. Now, Jeremy, what do you see? I'm going to ask you the same question. You're standing at about the same spot. What do you see?
A curtain, and a stage, and a flag.
Eric, do you see those things? Can you please correct Jeremy with his perspective? Because clearly you were both asked the same question, and you clearly should come to the same outcome. Jeremy, can you please educate Eric about the reality that you have at this moment?
I work with Eric, so he knows I'm right. I don't.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate you. You may sit down. So it's simple, right? We all have a side of a mountain. Whatever mountain it is that we're standing on, that mountain could be food, that mountain could be politics, that mountain could be a room literally that we're standing in, or it could be the topic of peanut butter, right? When we're asked the same question, of course we're not going to get the same answer. We all bring our own set of perspective, whether literally what we're looking at or the experiences that we've had in life or what we've learned through this industry. We cannot expect to have the same answer to every single question, especially for something that's so deeply, intensely personal as food. So when we have the opportunity to say, what's going on your side of the mountain, there's a two-step process to ask and to get more information. The first piece is just acknowledging, Eric, I understand that's what you're seeing. I'm not seeing it the same. Can you please tell me more about that? Right? You have to acknowledge that other people's perspectives may not be the same perspectives we have. Accepting somebody else's viewpoint is not meaning we're resigning to it, right? We don't have to feel totally indebted and believe and agree with every single thing that people say, but we do have to acknowledge that perception is reality. And whatever perception, experience, again, that people are bringing to these conversations is one set of reality that they are using to make their decisions. So we have to first be willing to say, interesting, I understand, that things can be confusing. Or I see that this is something that's new to me. I've never heard that before. Or interesting, tell me more, right? If you can say nothing else, tell me more about that, and ask that follow-up question. And the follow-up question doesn't have to be focused on the issue. It can be focused on the underlying, get underneath that iceberg. So somebody says, I only buy this product because I'm so concerned about these things, and I want to make the right decisions for my children, instead of saying, here's all the problems with everything you said related to the issues, why not just ask them about their kids? Oh, I hadn't heard that before. Did you say you had kids? How many do you have, right? Make it about them. Show them that you're as interested in knowing about them as you are in helping them understand the topics they're asking about. Once you get to that point and you start to get underneath the iceberg and understand what are the deeper drivers that are making this person have this concern or this question, then you get to a point where you get to share your story. You get to say, here's who I am as a person. Here are some of the titles that I have that are exactly the same titles that you have. Parent, concerned citizen, somebody who loves to spend time in nature, right? These are all things that a lot of people can say, I'm with you. I make decisions and I have those same realities in my life. And you also have to talk about what you care about. So, as somebody for me, I grew up on a farm. I'm a mom now living in suburbia, but I have a huge connection to the land. And I feel so privileged to be able to work in an industry where I get to connect with people who've literally dedicated their lives to pursuing agriculture. And so while I might not be a dietitian, while I might not be an agronomist, what I can tell you is when I meet farmers and I ask them about what they're doing, I feel incredibly trustful of what is going on today's farms. Would you be interested in knowing a little bit more about some of those environmental practices I'm hearing about? When you open conversations like that, you have a whole new set of expectations for where that conversation can go, because now people are listening, because they know that you have that connection. So when you think about, if I can share what are some titles that I have that have nothing to do with food or farming, right, that connect to this consumer, this eater, which, by the way, we're all consumers too, and sometimes we forget that. But if we can first say, here's how we're similar, and then say, and here's what I care about. I care about animals. As a livestock producer, first and foremost, I'm an animal lover. We forget that too, and consumers don't understand that. As somebody who raises crops every year, I am truly an environmentalist, and sustainability is the most important thing I can focus on as it relates to this land. They also don't know that we're thinking about that, and we've had sustainability practices in place for decades, okay, millennia, right? Once we tell them who we are and what's important to us, then we have the opportunity to tell them what we know, what we've learned, what we've been, what the aha moments are that we've experienced. And once we do that, then we get to a different side of that conversation. But what we have to know too is the process doesn't go listen, ask, share. It goes listen, ask, listen, ask, listen, ask, and maybe at that point share. Because again, remember that iceberg. We can't just listen to the first thing. We can't just ask one question. It takes multiple repeats of that to get underneath the very bottom to come out and be able to give them an answer to a question or a statement that's actually going to suffice based on their side of the mountain. So remember, listen, ask are the most important part of that process. And when you do finally get to share, think of your opportunity to share facts and data like the way you think about salt. Any bakers or cooks in the room? Anybody? Okay. What happens when you just sprinkle in salt? What's the outcome? Flavors increased, right? It adds a little bit of a spice. It gives something refreshing to the food. What happens, have you ever been at a restaurant where somebody before you at that table unscrewed the salt cap a little bit too much and you do this and there's a dump? What happens? You've totally ruined it, right? We've been doing that with facts and data and information for a really long time in agriculture. We didn't know, right? We thought when people said, I want to know more about what you do, that was our invitation to tell them everything we know. And all the ways, all the technical, jargon and everything that we really have dedicated our lives to. But we forgot that they can't digest it, right? It's too much and it's too outside of what they do on a day-to-day basis. So we have to think about facts, like sprinkling in a little bit of salt. Put a little bit in, do a taste test. Did that work? Do they want more? Sometimes they will. Sometimes it's the perfect amount and they're good, right? So think about facts when you get to that point of sharing your story, like salt. Just a couple final thoughts. We'll open up to a conversation here. First and foremost, we have a phenomenal opportunity to embrace the concern, to embrace the skepticism that's coming at us from all angles as it relates to eaters and what they want to know about this industry. But if we can understand that this is a societal condition, people have been trained to trust and mistrust after seeing decades of institutions that they don't trust because people in positions of power have made bad decisions and because there's so much information coming at them that they don't know what to believe. If we can see that as opportunity versus challenge, we have a great opportunity to actually come out in conversations in a different way. Secondly, let's not believe that I said anything like this. We cannot abandon science. It is imperative. It's less important. It needs to play a different role than it has in conversations about food and farming, but we don't get by in conversations without it, right? So we can't abandon it, but we do need it to play a different role in our conversations. We need to put it in our back pocket versus have it be tip of tongue. Another thing, we have to know that who you are is as important, if not more important, than what you know. Again, you know far too much, right? For the average consumer to have a real, true, rich conversation based on what you know. But they need to know that you are a person first and you're an expert third. And I say that not because I was never great at math, but because the model tells us facts are at least 3 times less important than just showing up as a human being and establishing that values-based connection. So if we can show up with the titles we hold that are true to us, but show something different than just the competence we hold, then we have the opportunity to also be the farmer, the agronomist, the person who's dedicated their career to the study of forestry, right? We have the opportunity to be both expert and human being in the same brush, and that's what's going to build credibility because it all matters. And then the last piece, know that 65% of the consuming public has said, I would like to know more information, right? It's not everybody, and it shouldn't be. A lot of people have made up our minds, including us. We're very pro-agriculture. So when you think about that bell-shaped curve, we're over here. People who don't like what we do are over here. Let's just agree to ignore each other and go for the rest of the population, those green, boxes and those research that I shared that are going to help us understand these are the people who want more information. These are the people who want to shake our hand and ask us about what we do every day. So there's great opportunity in that number. I'll open it up to questions. If you want more information from CFI, you can text that number. But I know that there are microphones out there, so I'd be happy to take any questions you might have. Back here.
Thank you. I live this quite a bit. My daughter-in-law is and I constantly have this conversation about her refrigerator full of organic stuff and non-GMO things. And I haven't won that battle yet, and I'm probably not sure that I'm going to. But what I see is when she Googles GMO stuff and there's a list of, she only reads the one side. And I said, you got to look at both sides of the story, and I just can't get that message across. And I think that's a big problem when those young 35-year-old ladies go looking for that information. That's the side they look at.
Yep. So you said a couple words that are flags for me. I can't win that battle. Okay? So if you're in a battle, I wasn't in the forces, I wasn't in military, but what I understand about a battle is typically there's a winner and typically there's a loser. None of us want to be the latter, right? So I get this question in various forms or flavors, right? Sometimes it's, I can't convince my wife, or usually there's somebody in the crowd that it's a sister-in-law type being at Thanksgiving, and they're bringing in interesting ingredients or opting out of specific things. We have to stop and ask ourselves, have we assumed that our way is the only way? Have we assumed we know better? And I would say she might be just like Sarah with the fancy shoes, who said, this is why I do this. I buy this because I believe it means I'm opting out of all this other stuff. So I would challenge and encourage you to think differently about that next conversation. And I will say not conversation, not messaging, not trying to persuade her into a different way of thinking or trying to correct her misinformation that she's finding on Google, because Google will support whatever you want to type in, you will find, right? So I think it would be important to really reflect a little bit, and this is true for all of us, me included. Start with that first step. Listen without judgment, more importantly, and listen to with the outcome that maybe there's some ways that you can be educated about her side of the room, her side of the mountain, on any topic that might come up. And if that's, GMOs or whatever it is that's in her fridge that's going, gosh, she doesn't know the whole story, help yourself with her and build a new connection by saying, so tell me why it's important for you to have those. And I'm just curious as to how you've come to a conclusion that those are the best ingredients, and what specifically is it looking for when you're buying those. Don't try to convince. Don't try to tell her that there's something that she hasn't considered. Just truly stop and say, I'm really just curious why those products are, the ones that you love. Again, it's so easy, again, myself included, to feel defensive on behalf of this industry. It's so easy to think every, name the issue flavor of the day is ours to defend and protect and advocate for, right? But at the end of the day, remember that GMO example. People want more information, and they don't necessarily have an opinion about something because they think it's the worst thing ever. Sometimes curiosity, sometimes a brand preference, sometimes they like the label, right? Sometimes they think it's really local or something. They think they're supporting something that this stands for. We have to be okay and really feel, again, privileged that we're in a country where choice is ours to make. And I think at the end of the day, if nothing else works, understand two things. One, it's not your job to change her mind, right? She's a big kid. She gets to make her decisions, vote with her dollars, as they say. But two, the way that you can end every single conversation and everybody come out, not as a battle, but as a conversation where everybody can win, is to say, gosh, aren't we all so lucky that we have the choice in this country? Because there are a lot of developing nations that never get to see the light of day, right? Remember the Norman Borlaug quote, people with food have lots of problems, people without food have one. Aren't we so fortunate that we live in a country where choice is the opportunity that we have every day? So, yes, sir.
I think this follows up on what you've been talking about, but you said we have an incredible opportunity to embrace the skepticism and concerns of the consuming public. Can you just elaborate on how that's an opportunity?
Yeah. So the question was, I said, embrace the skepticism, embrace the concern. Why is that an opportunity? Because we haven't in the past. In the past, I talked about that bell-shaped curve. Those of us on one side, pick any topic, okay? Pick water, okay? Consumers say we want clean water, and yet they see agriculture putting chemicals, pesticide, the things they don't understand fully, right? That are incredibly imperative, important part of tools that we have to protect food and ensure that it exists. But there are whole activist communities or advocacy groups that have said, here's what pesticides look like. This is what this means for your children. Have you seen the headlines about, pesticide XYZ and it's causing brain tumors in children and killing people and giving them cancer, and the list goes on. And you can swap out ingredients, you can swap out technology, put in any one of those. We as agriculture, as an industry, have spent a lot of time trying to correct that misinformation, trying to say, let me tell right? We've gone directly to those advocacy groups and said, you're wrong. And meantime, you know what those advocacy groups were doing? They were going to the rest of the population, 65% or more, that said, I don't know what to think, I have some skepticisms, and now I'm seeing all this imagery and all this data and all this research that tells me I'm right to question it. So our opportunity in looking at that and going, oops, now we have an opportunity to say there is skepticism, and for good reason. Because whether it's our daughter, or our cousin or our, in-law or whatever, whoever they are, they've gone to Google and they've said, does XYZ thing in agriculture or food cause XYZ bad ailment? They're gonna find information that supports that. There's great reason why skepticism is persistent in our society. So the opportunity is, let's dig into why and what they've read. Let's really try to see that different side of the mountain. Let's be as willing to understand their reality as we want them to understand our reality. Being willing to listen, though, and without judgment and truly understand more is the key. Education can be the outcome, but it should not be the process. Yes, sir. Yep, so the question was, as you think about your annual research and over a decade of doing that research, how have those boxes shifted? So the big, non-answer is, it depends on the question, right? But in general, how is that green box moving? Do we see more flexing? I will say a couple that stand out for me are the concern about climate change. When we first asked that question, the first several years, global warming was the vernacular that was used in media and with the public, and so we did add climate change as we saw that added into the conversation. That has increased about 10 percentage points from people who haven't made up their mind to I have a strong level of agreement that I'm concerned about this. There are other indicators too when we look at different generations, so maybe boomers versus millennials, where we see people are very interested in where food is grown, where it's coming from. They're interested in this idea of healthy, affordable is trending up on everybody, that they're looking for foods that can check multiple boxes. And there was a conversation earlier as well that I had with Jay about, I still think price, is going to play into a factor that people are making decisions for their food. I think the example was the grocery store circular that said 4 pizzas for $5. You can't tell me people care about health and nutrition and that's trending up when you've got people that are opting into that type of, so let me just say, price, taste, convenience are absolutely going to be continuing factors through which people make their decisions. But when they're asked questions like, do you believe organic is more healthful? And do you think that farmers are taking better care of the environment? When they see labels on food that say non-GMO or sustainably raised, sustainable forestry initiative, when they see things like that, it stands for something and they start making decisions or they start questioning the decisions they have been making. So by and large, again, it depends on which question we're talking about and which segment of the population. We are seeing some of those shifts. I think one of the questions that ties to this as well is, do you have all the information you need to make decisions about food? That has increased over time, and that's directly connected to people's ability to phone any friend they want in an immediate way. because that information accessibility is there. The challenge is they don't know what to do with the vast majority of information that oftentimes is conflicting. So, yes. Uh-huh. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Did you say thank me? Fake meat. Okay. Um, yeah. So to kind of summarize a couple angles here, how is it that we can have an industry, poultry industry specifically, where we've got companies who say, we believe in, we will use, and here's why, antibiotics. And then there are some that are saying, no antibiotics ever, right? You have conflicting systems there. And then the follow-up as well is on meat, in particular, the fake meats, Beyond Meats. You've got companies like Tyson investing. They actually did pull out of their investment in Beyond Meats, I think back in April. But we've got all of this energy going into the non-milks, the non-meats that are marketing themselves as meats, alternatives, right? So I'll handle the first. When you have an industry, again, choice is king. And that's why we can have an industry that says, here's what this brand stands for, no antibiotics ever, because we don't believe in it. We think that there's a different way of production. We're going to start to push back on the way that the industry has moved traditionally. They've seen that as signals through FDA Guidance 152 back in, I think it was 2017, when the new guidance, the new veterinary directive said, you have to go to a veterinarian before you're going to prescribe something that's important to human health. And here's why. Agriculture had a phenomenal opportunity. Anybody that was a veterinarian, anybody that was involved in livestock production had a great opportunity during that time when FDA said, we're going to put this guidance down. What every bit of agriculture should have said was, we know antibiotic resistance is real. It's documented, it's scientifically proven, it is real, and it happens because nature does it, right? It doesn't only come as a result of antibiotic use, but it is a contributor. So the first thing we should have said was, you're right, antibiotic resistance is a real public health issue, okay? And we are going to do our part. We are going to follow this guidance because although there are many contributing factors, we know that we can help with this real problem. We can do that without saying it's our fault, okay? But I think what happened at that point is companies said, this could be a make or break opportunity. Right? Every veterinarian you talk to is going to talk, in livestock production is going to talk about the role and the value that antibiotics can play in healthy animals and ultimately safe food. But to be the person that says, I'm going to protect and defend and not admit that there's any guilt of the industry to say that antibiotic resistance is our fault, we don't have to say things are our fault while also being part of a solution, okay? And I think that's the hesitancy. We in agriculture are a proud, humble group of people. We also don't want to be blamed. And we also want to be acknowledged how important we are to humanity, right? People don't eat, they don't exist. But I think in terms of that whole debate, are we going to be all in or all out as it relates to any technology, whether it's, animal health products or something else? Companies that have made those decisions have said, what do our consumers, whether that's a niche group, whether it's a big percentage of the population, what do they care about? What do they value? And when they see an issue like antibiotic resistance, which is what antibiotic use boils down to or up to for consumers, they don't understand the difference between antibiotic resistance, residues, no antibiotics ever, all the different labels that come related to it. What they understand is, I am trying to be a responsible human being making great decisions for my family that's going to be eating this or for my own personal health. If I can opt into something that says this doesn't contain this thing, which we know to be true, that's probably a rational thing to say. I'm going to opt into that. Now, do we have an opportunity as an industry to say, there's value in antibiotics. Of course we do. But let's talk about responsible use of antibiotics. Let's talk about how we partner with those, the veterinarians to make great decisions for us. So there's a lot of dynamics, but I think probably one of the tipping points was that Guidance 152 that gave a signal to companies to say, this is something that's so important that our government is going to put new rules in place that we have to follow, and there's market opportunity to do this. And I've met, people at both, I'm thinking about 2 companies in particular, but many of them now have made a claim in one way or another. But the first 2 that did that, the one that had both of them that had national campaigns that said, we believe in antibiotics and here's why, and they did it from a position of great intent. They said, we know the value this provides to farmers, to animals. We're going to stay the course. And the other group said, we've got a consuming public that's questioning what's going on, and we think we are an innovative enough company that we can do it right. So we're going to be a little bit different. We're going to put oregano in the water, for these chickens and help build immunity in a different way such that they might not even need, antibiotics. Everybody that's making these decisions thinks they're doing them for the right reasons, and they are right for the public that they're serving. Transitioning to we'll call them fake or alternative protein sources, whether that's milks, meats, we've seen egg, supplements in the past, or swap outs. I think what we all have to do is have a little bit of a sense of humor. We have to stop being really defensive and understand that ultimately, again, I'll repeat it, choice is king. I think we as an industry have found, for great reason, ways to be defensive when we probably don't need to be. If you've ever met a vegan that's come back from that side, I've heard so many times people said, I was vegan, but bacon, You can't have bacon if you're vegan, and so I've come back. I don't believe that people are opting into new types of meats because they really believe that those are meat. Okay, I don't think people are opting into almond milk or soy milk or any other because they believe that is milk. Okay, in the traditional sense. Certainly they don't even know, meat is from an animal, and soybeans are not meat, right? But we can stop and understand there's still great opportunity for agriculture even in the animal-less meat market. If consumers are opting into it, it's not because they're being duped thinking that that's actually real meat. I think they're thinking about it because they're going, I sometimes see some things that I have some skepticism about. I'm questioning what's going on maybe in animal agriculture. Maybe they've read the stories, the world reports about, the influence of beef production or dairy production in climate change. They're looking at emissions. For whatever reason it is that they're looking for an alternative, that's their reason. It's their reality. And I think when we get hung up on we need to change the conversation and you can't call that meat or you can't call that milk because of these definitions, I think sometimes we're missing the point. I think we're missing the opportunity to say, look, consumers are looking for new choices, and how can we as agriculture innovate such that we have a role in those new products versus being defensive. And I know that's hard, and that's not necessarily a popular message, because when it's our livelihood, when we've been a cattle producer, and steaks, and when that's our entire business, and something is getting in the way of it, and using our own terminology, it feels like a threat, for good reason. But can we find opportunity in that as well? That's what I would challenge us to do. Yes, ma'am.
One of the biggest problems that I see is not necessarily, we're all farmers in this room and we're all on the same team. We're just playing different positions. But I think what frustrates me is the marketing that's out there. I think she was saying she was in Arizona and saw non-GMO water.
Yep.
And those are the kind of things that I think pit us against each other. And how do you combat that is my question.
Yeah. It's a phenomenal challenge, and food companies are on the front lines of this on a daily basis. You've got different camps within food companies saying, hey, we're a water company. Water's gluten-free and GMO-free. Can we say that? Because margins are they're laser thin. as it relates to food products, grocery, the retail environment. So how can we differentiate our product or within our category? So they're going to say, can we do this? Is it true? And they see the opportunity. Then they go to the legal department, right? They talk to their lawyers. Can we say this? We can validate it's true. The claim is worthy of making. Legal department says, yep, good to go. Those bottles of water show up on the shelf. Gluten-free, GMO-free water, sodium-free water, whatever, right? And then the consumer goes, same brand, maybe same company, that's producing 2 bottles of water, and one of them says non-GMO, gluten-free, the other one says nothing. Now, conflicted consumer types in an email or a, contact me form to company X, help me understand, and now the consumer affairs department, the public relations department within these companies is going, who approved this, right? You've got challenges. So aside from the whole industry challenge of accepting that we all have a role, whether we're organic certified, which means something very specific to you, and you've worked really hard for that certification, we've got an opportunity to say there's a role for everybody to play here. But that conflict that's happening within food companies, of course, is happening in the broader industry. And I think you've brought up an amazing point. We're all farmers, right? We all have dedicated our lives to this incredible industry. And why can we not say there's room for everyone? When you look at the market opportunity, there is, whether it's organic or GMO free or whatever, there's great opportunity for everybody to play a role. And some of the bigger challenges that we have as it relates to the global dynamics of what's going on within our industry, I mean, those are much bigger ones. Can we at least start to get along a little bit better and understand and they're all good games to play, right? So I do think we have to be more open and welcoming, and the challenge of marketing is hard because people are looking for a way to differentiate. And I cannot speak for regulators who are trying to figure all of this out, but it is a challenge when you see those labels and you go, yeah, it's true, but not entirely truthful, right? It doesn't tell the whole story, and that's a challenge to us. Yep. Yeah. And I think we've even heard from, anecdotally from our focus groups, that organic means very different things to different people. So while there's a very specific definition through USDA, other people are using it and say, well, we're mostly organic. I mean, we grew it in soil. Well, wait a minute, right? Definitions are funny, and I think marketers are going to use those. And this doesn't mean marketers are evil, right? They're trying to say what is true. They have to follow the rules, but also what's going to differentiate our products. So I don't think, this isn't to call out any specific group of people, but there are challenges that we need to figure out as a food system that are both accurate and truthful, as well as disclosing that there's more balance, I think, than is perceived by the consumer.
We have a question back here.
Okay, one in the back, then you.
Yes, thank you. I would like to continue this conversation on the roles, because under our current structure, you might say how we try to address this issue is it through individuals? Is it through ag organizations? Is it through universities? Is it through whatever, focus groups or not universities, but companies themselves?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we get to that 65%? Is it through government? Not saying any of those things are right or wrong. What I'm trying to figure out is how do we get focused so we address that 65%, because under our current structure, each of those things I mentioned, each does a small bit. And I'm trying to figure out how to get to that broader.
Yeah, it's a great question. Somebody I work with has said, if you're trying to cross the ocean, if you're trying to move from this body of land to this body of land, you don't have to touch every single drop of water in the entire ocean. You need to touch just the ones from point A to point B, those drops, right? So when I say 65% of consumers are curious, but we have to find out who are those influencers that are also talking to a lot of other consumers. What I would challenge everybody in here to is think about those conversations that are sometimes uncomfortable, that, again, talk about maybe a scientifically complex, maybe even a controversial topic, and come into those conversations in a different way. It is going to take every single one of us every single association we're affiliated with, every food company, to be thinking about things differently, or a good majority of them, right? And we've seen phenomenal examples of companies who've established their brand based on a value and said, this is what we believe, who have weathered some pretty ugly, food safety storms, et cetera, and have still come out clean because they said, this is what we believe in. When you start talking about, here's the people in our company, here's what we believe, here's the decisions that we make, you all of a sudden are starting to talk in a really different language that actually speaks to consumers. So we need all of us. We need to connect with government officials. We need to understand that some people within our system are not necessarily trusted. So one of the markers is the closer you are to profit, the less I can trust you. So we have to get over that. Some of us are going to have a harder threshold to get over just simply because of what brand we have on our shirt, or who we're affiliated with, or even for our organization, who funds you is one of those questions that comes up. But what we can say is, understand it, appreciate it. We're member funded, and you can go and look at a list of every single one of our members today on our site. Transparency has to be part of it. That's going to help us get over the hump. But then again, we all have to be in these conversations. And I would say, if you don't feel like you can do it, just say, I've got somebody I know that you should talk to, right? Figure out those people that are wanting to be in this conversation, because there are plenty of us that are willing to have that conversation. But I would say, tune your ear in a different way. Absolutely support organizations that you're a part of that are trying to have a different level of communication with consumers, because at the end of the day, we have to serve consumers. We don't have an industry without them, right? And we, again, I say us, them. We are them. We are consumers of lots of industries, and we need to be willing to speak up in whatever venues we have the opportunity to do so. And remember how people are, where they're going for the first source. If that means you are going to get trained and go to the media tomorrow, do that. Because there's a segment of the population that's looking to media, local news to get their information. If that means you have a website, or you want to build a blog, or you're really active on social media, people are seeking information there. If that means you have the amazing community relationships, and you can go to your Rotary and your church group and the board of directors of any local community and just say, hey, we want you to know what's going on in agriculture. What questions do you have? If you can think about all those ways where you have connections and hopefully can build influence, then I would say do that, because people in every one of those spaces is looking for your voice, and 65% of them who are there want to know more.
We have a question back here.
Okay.
I'd like to know the Center for Food Integrity, what direction you all go. Do you get into the executive boardrooms under an invite, and some of your associations that you may work with, do they get into those boardrooms, or the developing strategies for the food companies that we all believe may be kind of going in the wrong direction?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, I'll say our board of directors is pretty diverse, and we have sectors of agriculture, National Pork Board, Farm Bureau, groups like that who are directly sitting with, key decision makers within companies like Wegmans and Costco, and we have 200 members and project supporters across the entire food system. So what I will say is, even as a 11-year-old organization, 10-year-old organization, you don't get into the boardrooms the first time, and so you don't get to help them develop strategy. But when you take hold, and when this idea, our trust research is really something different, and it's such an aha moment for people that when they see it, they're like, you gotta meet these people, you gotta help us develop our strategy, you have to help us think differently, because we're missing the mark. And so we do that. There's also opportunity for introduction. What I tell every single food company is, you've got this whole set of procurement people that are making decisions or requests of the farming community. Have they visited farms? And then when I go to the agriculture groups, I say, have you invited, the meat case managers from this really major retailer to come out to the farm? Have you talked to dietitians and said, come visit the farm, you're gonna shower in, you're gonna shower out, you're gonna, probably gonna get your boots dirty, but we want you to come and see this. There are opportunities like that around every corner. We don't hit a home run every time. We don't always get into that boardroom, but absolutely when we start to say, here's how we think and here's what we know, we absolutely do get in. And we do get companies. We're working with a company and probably 3 more because of the case study that came out of this one. But a company, global in nature, who has said, we have historically been an agriculture-focused, a production and farmer-focused company. We need to broaden our horizons and think about eaters, those people that consume our products, and we have a whole consumer strategy. Help us figure that out. And so we have, and we're training every one of their up to 20,000 employees on this exact approach to say, here's how we come into conversations differently, and even more importantly for these companies, here's how we're going to look at research and development differently. We're not just going to say, what can we find in a plant or in an animal or in DNA. We're going to say, what is it that consumers want? And then we're going to try to find that. So even the mind shift for, we're going to have a strategy to actually think differently about our company versus just think differently about the way that we talk. There's benefit in all of it, but we do see companies, major companies, that are making that transition.
I have a question. Most of your focus groups have been about adults. There's a whole group of emerging consumers in training. They're sitting in our elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools.
Yes.
So the question is, have you done any research to kind of understand perception, how they are informed, and how we build this population of emerging consumers who are aware and are comfortable with agriculture?
Yeah, so not enough. And I don't know who is at the forefront of that research. What we do know is that advocacy groups have partnered with communities, with curriculum developers, and they're in schools. One of the things that we've done, our Canadian sister organization, the Canadian Center for Food Integrity, has a very active, what would be equivalent to our Ag in the Classroom type program. And they've really focused on saying, here, we're going to be mythbusters, and we're going to talk about not only the careers in agriculture, but we're going to talk about what's not true that people are reading and come into these conversations differently. So they are getting into the system that way. I would say probably our best opportunity there is to look at the opportunities we have to bring people out, but also go to them. Cater to all the people, all the eaters who are looking to know more and understand. I don't know the best way to get to everyone, but if we can equip educators and curriculum developers to understand there are resources for them that are built in, that are focused on the learning standards that every teacher, every district is thinking about at that state and national level, then I think we have a better opportunity to put what we know about food and agriculture into the context of the learning standards that they're looking to meet. Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate the time. I'll be around, so let me know if any questions.
Thank you so much, Roxy. I think there's something from that presentation that everyone can go home with today, and we really appreciate Roxy coming and talking to everyone. So we have a 15-minute networking break. We have some delicious food. So take the next 15 minutes. We will reconvene at 10:15 with our next presenter.